in Singapore. He's actually Filipino, but he based in Singapore. So thank you very much for your participation in this Zoom discussion programs. And then we are, this topic, it's about cross-border terrorism. So why we choose this issue? Because we aware that there are, how to say, mobilizations of the terrorist group from Indonesia, from Malaysia, to Singapore, not to, yeah, to Singapore and also to the Philippines, especially to the Philippines, because this is a kind of like hotspot for the terrorist groups. And especially there are many, the Filipinos said that this is local terrorist groups. So now there are local terrorist groups in the Philippines, which is belongs to the ISIS group, or supporting the ISIS group, and they are now existing, and they are also already committed many violence acts in the Philippines. And unfortunately, for me, it is unfortunate because Indonesians also come there to support the cause. This is very worsening. This is very disappointing for us because I'm, as an Indonesian, I feel like guilty because they make problems in other people's country. So that's why we have to do something to prevent this to happen in the next future. So we are happy to have you here, and then
you are muted, Bu.
Mbak Deti suaranya nggak kedengaran.
Ya.
oh, kedengeran ya?
Yeah, now
Iya, dia mute sendiri ya.
Iya.
Ini handphonenya very sophisticated ya, because they unmute and mute by themselves ya.
It's a birthday present maybe.
Good handphone. So it is muted from the beginning, or just, I mean, you hear me before, or you just you didn't hear me at all?
We can hear you. We can hear you at the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I should repeat again. So thank you very much for your participations in the discussion, and thank you for our honorable speakers who are already providing their time for us to sharing their experience and knowledge to us. I'm really happy that you are here with us. And why we raise this topic, the cross-border terrorism, because we are aware that there are actually people from these groups, from radicals group or extremist group, who actually migrating from one country to another country to support the cause of this violence extremist group. And this is already quite sometimes happen actually during those days in MILF time, the Jamaah Islamiyah times, and still continue until today. And Philippines become the hotspot, become the kind of like a they have a magnet, yeah. Philippines have magnet because there are many groups there. And they are, I mean, the fighting with the government, I think a kind of like reason for them to join the groups. So we have, that's why we need to highlight this issue, because this is a kind of like challenges for us, how these groups are migrating from one to another, and then how they pass the borders and how they connect to each other and to fight in other country. Yeah? So we have 5 people actually who will be speaking in these sessions. We have Fik from Malaysia, who will share the from Malaysia, Afik M. Nur. He will share about his experience in Malaysia. Hold on, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, my laptop is quite slow, so I cannot see it. So Afik will share with us about Indonesian, Malaysian. Oh, sorry. The involvement of Malaysian in supporting radical and extremist group in Southeast Asia, their role and its network. So Afik will share with us. Afik, I think he has a long experience, and I have met when I was in Malaysia, Afik introduced me to the bodyguard of Osama bin Laden. It is really fortunate for me to have the chance to meet the bodyguard of Osama bin Laden. And Afik is actually the one who bridging me to him. So the second speakers will be from Malaysia, our respected woman, Amina Rasul. She will share with us about Indonesian, Malaysian, and the woman in violent extremism acts and violent extremism groups in the Philippines. How do they get involved and what are their roles? And then the third speaker is Joe Franco from the Philippines also, but he is now in Singapore. He will share with us about contextualize the FTF, the foreign terrorist fighters, because there are many foreign terrorist fighters in the Philippines, and he will share with us. Is there any other Indonesian or Malaysians or Singaporean as a foreign terrorist fighter? Maybe Joe later will share with us. And then the fourth speaker from Indonesia, Deka Anwar, he will share with us about migrations of Indonesians to join ISIS group and its splinters in the Philippines, their motive, networks, and its role. And the last one, our
Muted.
again unmute. So this handphone is very sophisticated. Yeah, they do the unmute themselves. Yeah. So the fourth speaker, the last speaker is Bapak Pribadi Sutiono. He will share with us about the government effort preventing and handling cross-border terrorism. So the challenges that the governments experience and how the governments, the Asian countries government dealing with this issue. So this is all are the speakers that we will have during today discussions. So to save time, because Pak Pri can only stay with us until 3 o'clock, so maybe we can go to the first speaker, Mr. Afik M. Noor. So before I give it the floor to Afik, I think I will introduce you first to him, first introduce him first to you, yeah. Who is Afik? I think many people know him very well, yeah, because he's traveling and know many people in Indonesia and I think in the Philippines. So Afik Muhammad Nur is a practicing lawyer specializing in constitutional law, Islamic law, and public interest litigation. He also an associate with Iman Research, Malaysian-based think tank, focuses on security, economic, and socio-cultural issues. So Afik will share with us the involvement of Malaysian in supporting radical and extremist group in Southeast Asia, their roles and its network. So without further ado, I give the floor to you, Afik. So please.
Thank you, Mbak Diti.
Hello, Afik.
Hello, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Diti, for the invitation. First of all, I must say that it's been a long time I haven't or haven't done anything on CVE, because currently I'm still on my final year of PhD in Islamic Studies and Gender. It has nothing to do with CVE anymore, but just sharing some experience while I'm representing detainees who's been involved in the jihadist movement in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysian. I can see that the issue of cross-border or trans-border is very pertinent. Before we talk about what happened now in southern Philippines, southern Thai, I would like us to go back to the historical dynamic or development. Since 1980s, there's a transmigration between Indonesian and Malaysian. For instance, it is not just limited to the Islamic movement or Islamic separatist movement, as in Gerakan Aceh Merdeka, GAM, and Jamaah Islamiyah, but other group as well, such as Tamil Tiger and few small group in Sri Lanka that migrated to Malaysia and seeking protection or based in Malaysia to collect some money and send it off to Sri Lanka, for instance. when we interviewed one of the friends of Hamka at that time, who was based in Penang. His name is Ustaz Zamzam. He said that his role at that time is to helping some of their friends from Aceh who flew to Malaysia because they have been persecuted by the Indonesian government at that time. So they give help, they give shelter, and they provide financial assistance to them. The same thing happened in 1988 when Ustaz Hashim Ghani, the owner of the principal of the Ma'had Ittiba' Sunnah in Kuala Pilah Negeri Sembilan, been approached by his Indonesian mate. If I'm not mistaken, it is from Ngeruki and Solo. He's been informed that some of the Indonesian preacher or da'i has been prosecuted and they need some help from him. So he said, why not just come to my place? You can do whatever you want here. You can learn, you can teach. So they allowed them to be part of their big family in Ma'had Ittiba' Sunnah. So what happened after 1988, Abdullah Sungkar and Abu Bakar Bashir and a few of them came to Kuala Pilah. They recite them. Initially, Ustaz Hashim Ghani gave them his school for them to stay temporarily. And they started recruited Malaysian or the student of Ustaz Hashim Ghani at that time. And one of the famous students is Pak Nasir Abbas, who was now in Indonesia. And then from Kuala Pilah, then they moved to Nilai, and some of them moved to Sungai Buloh. For instance, Abu Jibril, he moved from Kuala Pilah, Johor, to Singapore. To Sungai Buloh, which is near to Kuala Lumpur. Some of them has been invited to speak at the Islamic Religious Department. They played an important role. They became the preacher and they influenced people. You can see this continue not just during the Afghan time in which Pak Nasir Abbas was sent to Afghanistan from Subang Airport. At the time, they've been given different name and they've been strategizing here. But in the late early 2000, if I'm not mistaken, Abu Jibril, who was then still in Sungai Buloh from Kuala Pilah and Johor, he was involved in the Ambon fight, if I'm not mistaken. And they recruited a few Malaysian from Sungai Buloh to go to Ambon to fight. And then we have Yazid Sufaat, who just been released, and we have a few of other detainees who was very popular and who was at that time actually the student in Pakistan. They involved in either two main organization, which is Masa Pakido or Al-Ghuraba. Masa Pakido is one of the biggest organization of the student Malaysian student in Pakistan, and the other one is Ghuraba, which mostly consists of Salafis and the professional who send their kids to Pakistan. And then we have Tamil Tigers near to my office last time when I was still a practicing lawyer. There's a chapati stall who was operated by members of Tamil Tiger. What are they doing in the chapati shop? Actually, collecting money, like what happened within Jama'ah Islamiyah at that time. I mean, Jama'ah Islamiyah, as we know, they have a few mantiki, and the mantiki that is responsible to collect and raise fund was based in Kuala Lumpur, was based in Malaysia. Same thing happened to Tamil Tiger at that time. They're collecting monies, they're strategizing, they have their expert here who advising them on the strategy and how to the political strategy and I don't think the military strategy is much more rampant here. One of our respondents who attended, who he was this, his father was involved in Ghuraba when he was studied in Pakistan, and then he came back. He was one of the pupil of Imam Samudra. At that time, Imam Samudra and Abu Bakr Bashir have this small usra or a group discussion in, if I'm not mistaken, in Sepang, which is near to our international airport. So he attended the usra. They have a very systematic module. They have two volume module, which is compiled from, if I'm the first chapter, they're talking about Aqidah. So mainly they are talking, they just copy paste the excerpt from the, if I'm not mistaken, Syarah Salasatul Usul by Muhammad bin Abdul Wahab. And then they're talking about Wala and Bara, and then they're talking about Jihad. But when I asked about the military training, they said they've never been to any military training while they was in Kuala Lumpur, while they was in Malaysia. And one of the respondent that we met, he informed us that some of the Malaysian in Pakistan who involved in one of these two student organization, when they came back to Malaysia, they opened a food stall, and then they went to Poso to set up the training camp there, and then they came back to Malaysia, and then this is how it operates. Same goes to Southern Philippines and Southern Thai. In Southern Philippines, for instance, there's a Silat organization in Malaysia. Actually, he's a teacher of Silat, so he raised money every month and give the money to the group in Southern Philippines. And we've been informed by one of our respondents as well, who was involved in the police department, that some of the government official contributed 10,000 ringgit monthly to the separatist group in Southern Thai and Southern Philippines. I think overall, in Malaysia became a hub before 2000 because the easy access to Malaysia. We can see not just organization in Southeast Asia. We have somebody been killed by the North Korean in Malaysia, and then we have somebody from Ikhwanul Muslimin been killed here. We have somebody from what organization? From Hamas has been killed here. There are a lot of these people in Malaysia who came here to seek refuge temporarily, and at the same time they are raising fund, they are strategizing thing in Malaysia. We also been informed by some of our respondents that the government official themselves know about the existence of this group. For instance, when we talk about Southern Thai, they are here, they operating the Thai shop, but at the same time, I mean, we can't blame them 100% because the situation in Thailand is, Southern Thai especially, is very crucial and it's very different and dangerous. They are not able to work there. They've been harassed on a daily basis. So the only option, and because the border is very near, Malaysia is the only spot and the only hub that they can they can work here, they can raise fund, and they can do the advocacy or strategizing work for Southern Thai. That what we've been informed. And one of the case that I handle, which is for the first 3 cases of SUSMA, we did the case in High Court. They've been charged in High Court, and then we challenged the charge in Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal allowed our application. and then they've been released. But the public prosecutor then appealed to the higher court, which is federal court, and the federal court overturned the appeal. So this client of mine at that time, they are yeah. Sorry, I'm talking to my Grab driver because we are driving at the wrong direction. It's actually over there. So one of the accused was not been contacted, and I've been informed that she managed to escape from Malaysia to the neighboring country, and we don't know their location now. So I think the factor is that first, our border control is very weak in Malaysia, so they have easy access to come to Malaysia. And then second, the financial factor, and the third one, I think we don't have enough enforcement. I think I'll stop now. Maybe we can discuss further if you have any question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Afif, for your sharing, and I'm very sorry to inform you that which one is actually on. Sorry, this is technical problem I have. Afif have shared with us about his experience. That actually the village they should have how weak the border is, so the people can easily
Sorry, is that a question? Because I can't hear. Yeah, straight. Because I can't hear anything. Okay, yeah. You can drop me in front there. Yeah. How much, bro?
Halo, Mbak DT.
Okay. Online banking because I don't have enough cash, so I just. Is that okay? Hold on,
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Ya Mbak, silakan
Halo.
lanjutkan. Halo.
Ya, aduh saya minta maaf ini, ada sedikit gangguan ya di sini ya, technical problem. Jadi tadi saya sudah bicara panjang, ini apa namanya, diskusi ini saya belum sampaikan di depan bahwa diskusi ini adalah diskusi dengan menggunakan dua bahasa, jadi ada bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Okay, hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Suara terdengar, Mbak. Cuma video nggak muncul.
16201303
Oke.
03
Oke. Jadi Ibu,
1962.
halo. Ya, jadi
Is this
tolong
other bank?
apa?
What bank
Ya,
is this?
halo.
Maybank.
Tolong yang lain di unmute ya supaya kita bisa fokus. Nah ini apa diskusi ini saya minta maaf tidak saya sampaikan di depan belum sempat saya sampaikan di depan bahwa diskusi ini dilakukan dengan menggunakan dua bahasa karena ada pembicara dari Philippines yang tidak bisa bicara bahasa Indonesia jadi kita menggunakan dua bahasa. Nah, ada bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Jadi tadi pembicara pertama kita sudah bicara dalam bahasa Inggris, tapi pada intinya Afik bicara memang bahwa memang terjadi migrations dari Malaysia, Indonesia ke negara-negara di Asia Tenggara termasuk ke Southern Philippines dan juga ada migration of dana ya. Jadi ada pengiriman dana dan perekrutan pada saat itu pada zaman awal-awal gerakan ini ada. Jadi memang kita ini tantangan buat kita tadi bahwa yang disampaikan Afik adalah tantangan karena migration orang-orang ini atau mobilisasi orang-orang ini itu tidak hanya terjadi pada awal-awal dulu, tapi sampai sekarang juga masih ada. Nah ini yang menjadi tantangan kita. Oke, selanjutnya kita akan mendengar pembicara kita kedua yaitu Ibu Mrs. Amina Rasul. Amina Rasul sebelum sesinya saya serahkan ke Amina, saya akan memperkenalkan Amina dulu. Amina, I would like to introduce you to our participants here. Amina Rasul Bernardo is the president of Philippines Center for Islam and Democracy Council and member of the board of Makbasa Kita Foundations. Amina Rasul also member of the board of regents of Mindanao State University. And she's also board member of University of the Philippine Foundations and also member of Friends headed by Cardinal Orlando Quevedo. She was the vice chair of Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundations and also member of the board of Mindanao Development Authority. She has a long-standing experience and then also position. So I just introduce you with some of them because it is very long experience and also the position that he has been hold so far. So Amina was study in the University of the Philippines for her bachelor degree in economics and has MBA from the Asian Institute of Management. And she has double degree actually in mastery. She has MBA from the Asian Institute of Management. And she is also master in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So Amina will share about to us about the woman involvement in these radical groups, yeah, and how this woman will be moving from the other country and they come to the Philippines to join the cause. So without further ado, I give the floor to Amina. Amina, please, this is your time. And we give you 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Can somebody help me with the PowerPoint? Next, please.
Yeah, your PowerPoint is already on screen.
I can just share the whole PowerPoint presentation with everybody, but I think I'll just really talk about the first two chapters in the outline. Next, please. My brothers and sisters, the engagement of Muslim women in peace building, in business, in politics is something that's very well appreciated in Mindanao. But after the Marawi siege, another role played by Muslim women began to grab the attention of Mindanaoans and the entire country as well. In the Marawi siege, we call her the poster girl the poster woman for extremism, was Farhana Maute, the mother of the two leaders of the Maute group. Next, please. And then years after, when we had the Holo bombing, more women surfaced. This time, the first one is an Indonesian national, Reski Fantasia, also known as Sisi. She's now on the wanted posters in the Philippines. Next, please. And then the most recent bombing, August 24 in Holo, where more than 14 were killed and 7 of them were civilians. 2 more women surfaced suspected as suicide bombers. One known as Nana, who is the widow of Norman Lasuka, who is a suicide bomber. And another one, Inda Nai, who's the widow of an Abu Sayyaf leader, a supposed financial conduit, something like a treasurer. So you now have all these women who have come out as perpetrators, no longer victims. And the question that we now ask is, how did these women transform from what is known by the world as an image of Muslim women, peace-loving, family-oriented, supportive, obedient, right or wrong? That is the image that was that's in the mind of many who are not Muslim. And now we have these game changers, these women who are seen as perpetrators. And in the case of Farhana, an actual leader, she was a financier of the Maute boys who were her sons. Next, please. And looking at the motivation, it is really something that we have to acknowledge. The motivation for women to move from being family-oriented to perpetrators and mitigators of violent extremism, it does not matter whether you are in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Syria, Iraq. The motivation seems to be common. First, family ties. That is actually the first step to indoctrinating these women. Indoctrinated by husbands, by fathers, especially if these men or these boys are part of liberation fronts or terrorist organizations. The family ties make it almost impossible for these women to get out of the, shall we say, the circle of indoctrination that happens. The second, because of the close personal ties, is the desire for revenge. In the case of the 2 women who are suspected as suicide bombers in Holo, August 24, they are the widows of Abu Sayyaf leaders who were killed in previous bombings and clashes. So revenge is a very strong motivation, particularly if it is stoked, if it is made even more powerful by the teachings of the leaders of the Abu Sayyaf, the ISIS, or other extremist groups in the region. The third is the indoctrination. We have seen over the past 50 to 60 years, much influence emanating from the Middle East, from South Asia, particularly Pakistan, coming into Southeast Asia, and slowly but surely changing our perspectives of our faith of Islam from one that is truly based on peace and acceptance of others to one that is more narrow in a sense, that looks inward and looks sometimes more at form instead of substance. So it becomes, and here a lot is mentioned about the Wahhabi doctrine, the Salafi influence in Southeast Asia that has hardened our own viewpoints about Islam and the rest of the world. The indoctrination that has made many of our communities very rigidly fundamentalist has created a very fertile ground for the establishment of groups of organizations that look to avenge the persecution, the oppression, the injustice that have been suffered by our communities by acts of violence. So Islam, many would see not linked to peace or a middle way, but instead more affiliated to acts of war. And for those of us who have tried to immerse ourselves in the interpretation of our own faith, see this move towards a more militant interpretation of our faith as something that was never intended. But there you have it, family ties, revenge, indoctrination, motivations to make these women move from being supporters, the nurturers of families, to perpetrators and mitigators of violent acts. And all of this, the first three, are really made fertile by the foundation of persecution, oppression, discrimination, and injustice that abound in many of our communities. In the South, in Mindanao, the Muslim South, for instance, generations of injustice, the loss of sovereignty. This is a very potent motivation for young people, for adults, for women to be, shall we say, rail against a national government that is Christian, generally, overwhelmingly Christian. That is why the peace process that has been implemented by our government with first the Moro National Liberation Front and then second the Moro Islamic Liberation Front became a very powerful tool to bridge the gap between our communities and the national government, to find common ground where the Muslims, the Bangsamoro can now say, we will stop our war for independence and we will accept autonomy. Today, we now have the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, and the peace process is holding. The government has supported the Bangsamoro regional government, and we hope that the Bangsamoro regional government will be able to do a lot to neutralize the lure of violent extremists that have been pounding away at issues of persecution, oppression, discrimination, and making our people, especially our women and our youth, become easy prey, easy victims to the lure of these violent extremists. The one problem that we have, and which our government, your government, will have to address, is the fact that our communities, the Muslim communities, have very low levels of education, particularly in the impoverished areas, in the rural areas. And this is where the recruitment is happening. If you look at the education levels, for instance, in the Rohingya communities of Myanmar, in the poor communities of Indonesia and the Philippines, the levels would perhaps more closely approximate the low levels of education in very poor African countries than the levels of education that you see in Singapore or in Malaysia. What can be done by our governments to change this situation, this lack of education? Uneducated people are easy prey to the lure of violent extremism. And somehow it makes me feel strange in many ways that a faith that values education, for after all, the first commandment to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, was Ikra, read. How can such a community support these very low levels of education and very high levels of illiteracy? Next, please. Now, let me share with you some survey results from a survey that we worked on together with a premier survey group in the Philippines, the Social Weather Stations. We did this after the Marawi siege because we wanted to find out whether the seeds of violent extremism or terrorism is embedded, shall we say, growing in the hearts and minds of our communities. Next, please. So in this particular slide, we wanted to find out whether the victims of the Marawi siege, the victims of armed conflict in Marawi, in Lanao del Sur, in Maguindanao, felt differently than the normal citizens when looking at their quality of life. Is there a difference between the male and the females? And you can see here that there is not much distinction between male and female with regards to their appreciation of their quality of life. And this is after the siege. They remain hopeful in many ways. Next. Next, please. Then we decided to look at who do they trust. And here, as you can see very well, the highest trust ratings go to the religious, the imam, the alim. And again, there is not that much difference between male and female Muslims. Next, please. Now, we asked the question whether they saw the problem of terrorism as very serious or not serious. And as you can see, again, there isn't that much difference between the perception of male and female. They see terrorism in the world as serious, 78% of the males and 78% of the females. In the Philippines, they also saw it as very serious, but here you see a differentiation. The males saw 82% saw it as very serious, again 75% above the women. In Mindanao, do they see it as very serious? Again, if you see here, the percentage of women seeing it as very serious is a little lower than the male. And the same is true when you ask them whether terrorism is very serious in their own home community. Next, please. Go back to the previous, please. Why do I show you these slides? This survey we conducted with the SWS after the Marawi siege, when so much destruction, so many deaths had been experienced by our people. We looked also at communities in Mindanao where armed conflicts had made people suffer. And in theory, one would expect that these communities would have anger levels that would support the theory that people in armed conflict are the source of violent extremism. And much to our surprise, we found out that their views on terrorism, on their own life, does not justify that particular theory. And if that is the situation, we have to ask ourselves, what other motivation can there be? Which makes it very important for us to look at the relationship angle, the family ties, the indoctrination by our religious leaders, especially when you look at that slide, the previous slide, please. No, the previous, the one with the imam, previous. There, especially when you look at the trust level that they have for their imams and their ulama, their alim. When you see this, then it becomes very clear that we have to work with faith-based organizations, whether it's in the Philippines, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, and in other countries. And we have to get our own religious leaders to work with us in establishing foundations for peace and in looking at the interpretation of our faith to counter the very distorted interpretation that have been used by those who recruit for violent extremists. I think I'm going to stop there, but the presentation that I had made has a lot of recommendations for women's engagement in PVE, but I think Dete can just share this with those who would be interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, for your super presentations. Dan Ibu Amina tadi cerita kepada kita tentang bagaimana keterlibatan perempuan di sana. Tapi Bu Amina juga tadi bilang bahwa ini motivasinya bukan cuma perempuan dan laki saja, tapi mereka sama. Terus ada ini penyebab motivasi mereka yang mereka terlibat dalam jaringan ini adalah ada macam-macam ya. Ada tadi family ties, ada hubungan kekeluargaan, ada dendam, ada ketidakadilan. Jadi hampir sama lah dengan apa yang terjadi di Indonesia. Nah, itu tadi presentasi dan survei yang disampaikan oleh Bu Aminah tadi menarik juga ya. Menurut saya menarik untuk melihat apalagi setelah Marawi gitu ya, keterlibatan perempuan dan laki-laki, dan saya melihat banyak juga ini perempuan yang terlibat dalam gerakan ini. Terima kasih Aminah for your presentation. I just try to translate it into bahasa. I mean the point only, not all. So from Aminah, we move to Joseph Franco. He's also from the Philippines. Pak Joseph ini juga dari Filipina, tapi sekarang dia menjadi research analyst di Singapura. Nah, Pak Joseph Franco ini dia sangat mahir untuk isu FTF ya. Dia menguasai isu FTF dan juga akan berbagi dengan kita tentang FTF, Foreign Terrorist Fighters, atau pejuang tentara tentara non foreign terrorist fighter. Jadi tentang foreign terrorist fighter. Nah, Pak Jo ini welcome Jo. And sebelum saya akan ke Pak Jo, I will introduce you first to the participant. Joseph Franco ini specialist in counter violence extremism dan counter insurgency. Dan he's also a research fellow with Center of Excellence for National Security at RSIS in Singapore. Previously, he worked for the Chief of Staff Armed Forces of the Philippines and G3. Yeah? So Joe is having his master's degree in international relations at RSIS in Singapore, and he's frequently a research person for international media such as BBC, Channel News Asia, Deutsche Welle, and Time. And Joseph also examined terrorist network in maritime Southeast Asia and best practices in CVE. So Joe will share with us about the contextualizing FTF. So without further ado, Joe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Hi, Ibu Dete. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone for having the time to join the conversation. It's going to be a tough act following through with Madam Amina Rasul's presentation, and I guess what I'm going to say is that I'm just going to contextualize, because the whole program, this whole program is going to be about transnational terrorism, how those borders work. So I just want to contextualize, like, foreign terrorist fighters, how do they really figure in the whole southern Philippines picture. So I guess I'm going to start and say, bottom line up front, when you talk, the first question that anyone asks when it comes to foreign terrorist fighters is like, how many are out there? And I guess that question, how many out there, it's the usual answer is 40 to 60. It's 40 to 60 foreign terrorist fighters in Mindanao, and I've always wondered, where the 40 to 60 has come from, because there seems to be a sort of convergence on the numbers. If you look at publicly available numbers, say if you look at the USDOD, the Indo-PACOM, they have the same figures. If you ask around NGOs in the Philippines, they say the 40 to 60 number. When you ask military commanders, military officers in the Philippines, you get that 40 to 60 number. So it always gets me thinking, because that if you look at media reports, you would tend to get an impression that the numbers of foreign fighters are rising. But the 40 to 60 people, the 40 to 60 number hasn't really changed. Even if you look before IS emerged. Personal anecdote: when I was still working in the armed forces, when the issue was still about Al Qaeda, it was 40 to 60. So it got me thinking. It got me thinking that I guess one of the key arguments that I'm trying to make in this presentation is that the 40 to 60 number, I think that's the natural limit. I think that's the what you can say the absorptive capacity in Mindanao. I would like to argue that you can't go anywhere above 40 to 60 for a various number of reasons. So that's like my bottom line up front. Because when you talk about foreign terrorist fighters in the Philippines, there's a fair bit of hysteria at times. When I first moved here to Singapore, people would go on and say like, oh no, the groups in the Philippines are getting more extreme. They're beheading people, and I'm simply not. I'm not fully buying into the whole bit, because if we're talking about beheading people, it was happening in the southern Philippines way before ISIS was around. I can make the argument even that one of the most notorious cases of armed groups beheading victims was actually done by a Christian militia under the behest of the Philippine security services during the 1970s. And if people in the crowd may know of the group, the Pultong Tadtad, which literally means to chop chop. These militias are just a part of a constellation of militias that operated in Mindanao. I'm pretty sure Madam Amina Rasul are familiar with all of the Christian cult militias that proliferated in Mindanao. So to say that a specific tactic can be tied to a specific ideology, I don't think that that's a non-starter. Also, when talking about foreign fighters, there's always an assumption that that foreign fighters go in and that immediately they provide new, novel, and deadlier, more exotic techniques, tactics, and procedures, TTPs. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened, but I think it oversimplifies a lot of things. I mean, it's quite true. I mean, the Holo incident, it's an escalation on the type of violence. It's an escalation on the technique, but it's a two-way street. When I was in Mindanao in 2018, I was able to talk with Father Chito Suganov, the late Father Chito Suganov. He recently died. Father Chito Suganov was captured. He was held hostage by the Maute group for 116 days in Marawi. And in one afternoon, I was able to have a long conversation with him in the course of one afternoon. I asked him, like, Father, what about the foreigners? We were conversing in Tagalog, we were conversing in Filipino, and then I asked him, how did they fight? How well did they fight? Did they learn something new? And Father Chito was very specific. He was very explicit, and I've published this material elsewhere. And he said that to quote Father Chito, he said he wasn't impressed. During those more than 100 days of capture with the Maute, he has had conversations with the Indonesian militants. And the Indonesian militants were apparently more concerned, more preoccupied to die and to obtain martyrdom rather than fighting. And apparently some of the local militants that were with them were, for lack of a better term, were disappointed that they weren't as skilled as they were. So aside from martyrdom, they wanted to go there not to share skills, but to actually learn. Because for them, coming back from a battlefield like Mindanao, it gives you more street cred going back, whether you're from Indonesia or Malaysia. And there's also some, when it comes to FDF, there's also some points raised about funding. And indeed, there are documented cases. I think Mahmoud Ahmad from Malaysia, current estimates, they were saying that he sent in like $600,000 US and whatnot. I mean, that's a fair amount of money. 600,000 works out to 30 million pesos. So that's 30 million pesos. But 30 million pesos, if you put that in the context of how much the different threat groups are getting money from extortion rings, kidnapping, that's a drop in a bucket. And when I was doing field work, my last field work before the pandemic happened was around late 2019. In late 2019, I was talking to some contacts and sources in central Mindanao, in Maguindanao, and they were telling me that some of the militant groups in Maguindanao were actually disappointed because the foreigners that went with them, that came with them, didn't bring any money with them. They were a bit disappointed that the Indonesians were just as financially cash-strapped as them. Because in the Philippines, it was Indons, Malaysians who form bulk of the FDFs. There's like maybe a couple of Singaporeans running around, but and some of the Singaporeans who are running around in Mindanao have been killed 6 times over because the military will declare, oh, we killed them, and then apparently he's alive. So there's that. So what are the factors that inhibit, if I could say that, would inhibit the whole impact, the influence of FTFs? Again, I'm not discounting that FTFs do not possess influence, but I think it's more overstated most of the time. What we need to look at is the localized triggers of conflict, because the conflict in Mindanao it's very localized. And as an example, and I've published this previously, it's not enough to it's not enough that a foreign influence comes in and it creates violence, right? If you look at where most of the heaviest fighting happened, right? If you look at Maguindanao, the SPMS box, as they call it, where the BIFF is, or maybe there was some, or the fighting in Marawi, in Lanao del Sur, right? So you have Lanao, you have Maguindanao. Smack in the middle of it is what people call the Iranun corridor. And I've written about this, but more has been written about this by Pancho Lara and International Alert. The whole idea about the Iranun corridor, right, is because even though there's pockets of fighting surrounding them, they were able to prevent conflict in the Iranun corridor. The Iranuns are one of the 13 ethnic groups in Mindanao. They were able to use their own conflict resolution mechanisms. So clan conflict, which can feed into violent extremism, the idea of the rido, is resolved at the level of the clan and the community. So that's why the Iranun corridor is fairly free of violence. So that's one thing to think about. The way those local, on the one hand, clan structures can foment violent extremism. One clan can align themselves with a foreign group, but we should not discount the ability of local clans to resolve their own conflicts. One other thing that inhibit the entry of FTFs, right? It's just not an attractive place to be. If you look at around 2014 to 2016, if you look at IS propaganda, a lot of the IS propaganda includes violence, right? But the violence is also complemented by other propaganda. You would have IS propaganda, Daesh propaganda, showing that they have Ferris wheels in Raqqa. They have movie theaters. You have bakeries. You have schools. So there's a lot of enticement, right? If you're you can imagine their propagandas are working like, look, if you want to fight, there's opportunities to fight, but we also have daycare for your kids. Now, juxtapose it with the propaganda that came out with Mindanao. You don't see something like that. It's more of a realm. It's more of an area for war and conflict. You don't get to raise your family. There's no Ferris wheels over there. There's no big community centers for militants. And I think that's one less enticement and inducement for an FTF, right? I mean, after you fight, what's next? Unlike, say, the height of propaganda for Daesh, there's a lot of violence and non-violence. You get to fight, but you also get some R&R. There's nothing like that thus far in Mindanao. And of course, the other inhibiting factor is it's just the infrastructure. I was always I'm always a bit of a logistics guy.
Okay.
I'm always a bit of a logistics guy. One of the things that say make it easy for FTFs to travel to say from Europe or Turkey to Syria is that you can take a bus and hop a bus and go out to Raqqa or Mosul or wherever. No similar transportation pipeline exists. You can take a bus from Izmir to Mindanao or Raqqa to Mindanao. It's an exaggeration, but there are very real constraints when it comes to transportation. And if you look at, say, not just the physical infrastructure, but the internet infrastructure, if you go to Mindanao, I mean, there's a lot of places where the telephone signal 4G doesn't really exist. So it's really hard to run and do a remote controlled radicalization of sorts. It happens, but it perhaps to a degree, several degrees lower than what is often reported. So again, there was this I think I saw in the chat someone was mentioning about how some Indonesians were teaching in madrasas. I think it's a fairly common occurrence, especially in the eastern Mindanao side, South Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, the Sok Sargent region, which is not really part of the whole of the core Bangsamoro, so to speak. And in fact, taking that anecdote further, when Marawi 2017 happened, it coincided with a tabligh, with a educational event, Islamic educational event, which is, it's not actually that surprising given that MSU, Mindanao State University Marawi, I mean, Marawi is a center of Islamic education in the Philippines. So it just goes back to my further point, right? Just because there were Indonesian passports recovered in the ruins of Marawi, that does not automatically mean that they were there to fight. For all we know, they were there for legitimate reasons. They were there to get Islamic education, much like you would pursue Islamic education elsewhere. So I guess I have a few more minutes. Current state, there's COVID. I think there's a lot of questions whether or not, you know, COVID, would it mean that there would be more attacks? Would it trigger more attacks? And I think we should realize that even violent extremists or terrorists, they play the same rules as us, in the sense that they're not gonna magically appear in one place from point A to point B. They also have to deal with travel restrictions and public transportation. You can make the argument that the military being upfront in all these COVID checkpoints means that they're more vulnerable targets. Yeah, that's a valid point. But if you're a militant trying to move around, it's going to be more difficult. So just a quick preview. I've got a couple of publications looking at the barter trade in Mindanao, and the barter trade in Mindanao has pretty much continued, even in spite of all these travel restrictions. But I mean, good luck to you if you want to travel across jurisdictions in the Philippines right now, because there's a lot of checkpoints. And what the sense that I'm getting from these barter traders, even before ISIS, is that these barter traders, they cover Zamboanga City, Basilan Province, Sulu Province, and Tawi-Tawi. These barter traders have not, they don't find it practical, and they don't find it actually useful for militants to hitch a ride with them, so to speak, right? I mean, if you're in the barter trade, you're already in the legal gray line. If you involve yourself smuggling persons and suspects from Indonesia and Malaysia, then you'll just bring on more heat, and you're bound to lose your economic resource. You know, the fact that you're involved in the barter trade, and that similar idea wherein FTFs can actually, foreign terrorist fighters can actually bring heat. They can bring unwanted attention. It's the same reason why, for instance, some groups in Maguindanao are laying back. They're actually some of the BIFF guys were actually distancing themselves away from FTFs, because they know if they have FTFs, then they'll be bound to be bombarded more by government forces. So I guess that's it for now. I've gone a little over 15 minutes, but if there are other questions, follow-up questions, then I'd be happy to engage in the upcoming Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for your presentations. I think I have translated some of your presentation, but not all, because you speak quite fast and my finger is too slow to follow you, to catch up. But anyway, this is very good discussions. And then I also, when I was in Marawi, I also got information that there are Indonesians who are actually involved before Marawi sits. They do training on pencaksilat, on martial arts, to the people that recruit by Mauti. So this is very interesting that we actually found the facts that there are Indonesians there, yeah, who participate to support the Mauti's group. So, but later you maybe can explore further because you were there, you are know well. So maybe we can discuss further in our Q&A discussion later. So next we move to Deka Anwar, the research analyst of Institute for Policy Analysis of Conflict, or IPAC. He has the experience before as a support consultant for UNDP on PCVA and also assisting the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue at Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. And she was also a project officer in Search for Common Ground. So Deka was graduated from University of Gajah Mada in Yogyakarta, major in political science for his bachelor degree. And for his master's degree, he took in, it's quite far, in Sweden in Uppsala University, major on peace and conflict studies. So Deka will share with us about migration of Indonesians to join ISIS group and its splinter, because there are so many splinters, I think, in the Philippines. And the motive, network, and its route. So how could Indonesia travel to the Philippines? In which route that they are usually take to go to reach the Philippines? So Deka, the time is yours. The floor is yours, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mbak Dete. Can you hear me? Please interrupt me right away if my voice or something wrong with my video or the voice. No problem, yeah, Mbak Dete?
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Yeah. Can you also share my presentation?
Yeah. Yeah. Mas Taufik, can you share? Because the other team is the one who present.
Yeah.
Who do the technical work for the presentations.
In the meantime, I just want to warn that it's a very big topic. Migration of Indonesian joining pro-ISIS groups in the Philippines, motivation, network, and roots. So as a result, my presentation is gonna be quite long, a lot of names, a lot of maps, and a lot of graphs. So I hope you be patient a little bit while I'm trying to explain every points of it. Can you go next? To discuss about migration of Indonesians to the Philippines, we need to go back a little bit to the history of Indonesia and Philippines extremist interaction. As it was already mentioned repeatedly before, in the mid-90s to 2002, Indonesian people and maybe Malaysian and other nationalities went to the Mindanao was largely for capacity building, following the tradition before in the 80s, joining the during the Cold War era in Afghanistan. They continued the capacity building in Mindanao, and most of them went to central Mindanao at the MILF territory, and so it was basically a capacity building. Then in mid 2000, especially 2003 and 2007, we saw a rise of actual terrorist acts in Indonesia, which also resulted in so many people get arrested, especially DGI members, and then also so many of them became fugitives. And these fugitives went to Mindanao, including Dulmatin and Umar Patek. And at the same time, MILF wanted to initiate a formal negotiation with the government. And then their affiliation to GI, the presence of Dulmatin, Umar Patek, and people who were affiliated with GI and Al-Qaeda, undermine their legitimacy to have a formal negotiation with the government of the Philippines. So the MILF decided to kick out the majority of these fugitives, and most of them went to Sulu Archipelago, including Basilan, and they started the gradual strengthening of partnership with the Abu Sayyaf group in the Sulu Archipelago. In 2007 to 2014, There were not that many Indonesians went to Mindanao. There were some, but mostly for the purpose of buying arms, especially in Sarangani province in Jensan. And then at that time, training capacity building effort was actually facilitated in Indonesia, and then the Indonesian extremists at that time saw the Aceh training camp as the better alternative than training in Philippines. It's just closer and cheaper, and then safer before the Indonesian crackdown on them. And then, so from this background, we have the old pattern, to simplify it, so that migrating to the Mindanao for the purpose of training, capacity building, and arm purchase. But this is about to change later on. Next slide. So pre-Marawi siege, the still training. Once the ISIS was established in Syria, the point of contact between ISIS Syria to Southeast Asian extremists was by and large represented by the Katibah Nusantara, a pro-ISIS armed group led by an Indonesian Bahram Shah. So the coordination, further on, the coordination from Syria to Indonesia and the Philippines also facilitated by Dr. Mahmud Ahmad, a Malaysian university professor who at that time was already migrated to the Sulu archipelago and controlled the recruitment for international fighters and operational financing. Later on, after the Marawi siege, the Philippine authorities reported that there was a $600,000 fund directly channeled from Syria. But a lot of this money were actually channeled via Indonesian contacts first before it was transferred to Derek Mahmud Ahmad. So this was the initial phase of the pre-Marawi siege. In the meantime, a coalition of pro-ISIS groups in Basilan and Central Mindanao was emerging. Can you go to the next slide? Next slide. Okay, so while the coalition of pro-ISIS group was emerging, in Indonesia, Katibah Nusantara and the people who wanted to go to Syria, but probably struggled to find a means to go there, they were directed to go to Mindanao. And then there were several key figures in this effort to go to Mindanao. And then there was, of course, as I mentioned before, Dr. Mahmud Ahmad. And then there was Rois, a death sentence terrorist prisoner who is being held in prison, but he still managed to contact several key figures to go to Mindanao for various purposes. And there was also Rahmat Septrianto, another members of JAD, who helped to facilitate the Al-Huwariun or Abu Nusaybah network, including Yoki Pratama and Anggara Suprayogi. These are several individuals who wanted to go Syria but were redirected to Mindanao. So there were a lot of money exchanges during this process. For instance, Adi Jihadi, Ahmad Suprianto, he helped Dr. Mahmud Ahmad by transferring some money, including a couple of times of $25,000 transferred to Dr. Mahmud Ahmad through Western Union. And then there was also Suryadi Masud, who was instructed by Rois to purchase arms, including he bought 12 rifles and 5 pistols in General Santos at Camp Khalid in MILF camp in Sarangani province, and later on he went to Basilan and bought another a dozen of firearms from Hapilon in Basilan. And we'll get back to this story of firearms later on in the later part of the presentation. So these are the several figures, and it's not this is not a hierarchical structure, although Katiba Nusantara as the main contact in Syria, but Dr. Mahmud Ahmad, Rois, and Rahmat Septrianto are the several key figures that helped to facilitate Indonesians who wanted to go to Mindanao. And again, next slide. The purpose was capacity building in Mindanao, and this was before the Marawi siege. And there were several key training camps for the foreign terrorist fighters in Mindanao. And that include the training camp in Sultan Kudarat, hosted by Ansar Khilafah Philippines, AKP, from 2015 and 2016. The AKP absorbed a lot of Balik Islam or newly converts Muslims and several foreign terrorist fighters from Indonesia at their training camp in Sultan Kudarat. And then this training camp went on operated until 2016 when the military launched operation against them. And then there was also Maute Group training camp in Butik, Lanao del Sur, as it was mentioned before. This training camp culminated to the siege of Butik in February 2016, where hundreds of fighters from Maute Group and pro-ISIS fighters stormed the Butik town and took over the town for several weeks until the Philippine military managed to take it over again. Some would say that the siege of Butik was the gladiresque or the rehearsal for the Marawi takeover a year later. After the siege of Butik, there was also ASG training camp in Basilan, hosted by Isnilon Hapilon. This is where Rois affiliated in networks, including Suryadi Masud and Adi Jihadi went. They went to Basilan, while Suryadi Masud was also helped to recruit more individuals to go to Mindanao. So in January 2017, a lot of the fighters in Basilan, including Isnilon Hapilon, finally relocated to Lanao del Sur to join the rest with the pro-coalition ISIS group before they started the operation, the Marawi siege, which started in May 2017. Next. So the Marawi siege, how many foreign terrorist fighters were actually there? It was confusing at that time. Philippine authorities said there was 100 fighters, and then it was confusing to tell because I refer it to the red herring kind of situation where there was also hundreds of Jamaah Tablighi who had Ijtima or religious congregation at that time in Marawi city, and then later on 16 Tablighis from Indonesia were stopped during the siege in May 2017. So it was hard to tell at that time how many were actually there, how many FTFs, how many from Indonesia, how many from Middle East. But later on, in the aftermath of Marawi siege, an actual number we can finally estimate. Next. Can you go next? So there were actually around 20 FTFs from Indonesia, including 6 who was killed. Can you go back? including 6 who were killed during the siege and 2 arrested. Among those who were killed was Yoki Pratama and the networks from Bima and the one from Lois. So there were 6 killed, 2 missing, and then countless others become fugitives. So this, however, during the Malawi siege, a new pattern of migration to Mindanao changed. The ISIS magazine, Lumia and Dapik, started to propagate a new motivation, that is to Hydra to Mindanao to fight. So before it was for training, for capacity building for Indonesian, especially Indonesians and Malaysian. But now with the Marawi siege, which lasted for roughly 2 months, publication after publication from the ISIS continuously to propagate Mindanao as the alternative for Takzim, or to fight against the Crusaders government of the Philippines. So more people were trying to go to the Philippines as the siege goes on at that time. However, although here some media incorrectly labeled Marawi as the East Asia Wilayah, the ISIS Central at that time didn't really consider it as a wilayat yet, or a province of Daulah Islamiyah. In their publication, it still was considered as East Asia, as a region where ISIS military operation was taking place. So it's not wilayat, but this status made the pro-ISIS armed groups in the Mindanao to compete, to outbid for violence, for the wilayat recognition. So it becomes so more violence were committed along in Sulu Archipelago, Central Mindanao, during the Marawi siege. So there were a lot of violence spread across the Mindanao. And then in the meantime, more people, especially in Telegram, discussing about how to go to Mindanao. And then a lot tried to go to Mindanao, but the majority of them were stopped by the immigrations, either in Malaysia or in the Philippines. Next. Next. So what was the roots? The majority of the fighters who managed to join the pro-ISIS actually didn't use illegal route. The majority of them used international flights, especially Cebu Pacific, because it was the cheapest route to go to Philippines. They go from either Jakarta direct to Manila, Zamboanga, or Cagayan before the Marawi siege, and then they go to Lanao del Sur, or they go to Basilan during the training phase prior to the Marawi siege, or they go to Kuala Lumpur and go to Manila. The minority did use a sea route from Nunukan, Tawau, Sandakan, and then take a ferry to Tawi-Tawi and Sulu Archipelago. But if you read the news in 2017, there were quite a lot of people, especially Indonesians, Bangladeshis, Middle Easterns people who were arrested in Sabah for trying to go ride a ferry to Mindanao for no obvious reason. So yes, so it was right in front of, under the nose, the migration to Mindanao. Although after the siege, quite a lot of them got arrested. But during the preparation phase, most of them managed to enter the Philippines. Next slide. So, and then the post-Marawi, 2018 and to today, there were few policy interventions responding to the Marawi siege, and then the problem of cross-border terrorism. First is the trilateral cooperative arrangement, or Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, for the counter-terrorist and terrorist financing, which was established on 23rd of June 2017. And second, to address the kidnap for ransom activities that surged in 2016, there was and still ongoing effort, the Trilateral Maritime Joint Patrol in the Sulawesi Seas, which was officially started in 2017. And in Sabah, which was the landing pad for a lot of extremists to go to Mindanao, the Eastern Sabah Security Command launched an embargo to the barter trade economy in Sabah, and then also crackdowns operation against illegal migrants living in the water villages in the Sabah Eastern coastal regions, especially in Sandakan and Lahat Datu. These crackdowns of illegal migrants will bring another impact to the pattern of migration of Indonesian to the Philippines, which I will discuss later on. So next slide. However, despite of the policy intervention, extremist violent acts in the Philippines continue. Kidnap for ransom return after 2 years of laws between 2017 and to the mid 2018, and then the unprecedented suicide bombings in Lamitan and in Sulu. The Lamitan bombing, which was on 31st July 2018, which was committed by Egyptian fugitive suicide bomber Al-Khatir al-Maghribi from Morocco, led to the following arrest of several other Middle Eastern individuals in Mindanao. The incident and the arrest of Middle Eastern individuals shed lights on the presence of actual Middle Eastern fighters and fugitives in Mindanao. And then the Lamitan bombing, although it was in Basilan, the preparation of it was orchestrated in Sulu by SG fighters under Hatip Hajan Sawajaan in Patikul. So, and then in January, the holo bombing, which was perpetrated by the Ruli Rian Zik and his wife, Ulfa, at the Mount Carmel Cathedral in Holo. The incidents was very unprecedented because there was few suicide bombing incidents in general in Sulu Archipelago, and it revealed Indonesian and Malaysian FTFs presence in the province. And also a new pattern again emerged, the new destination. So now the new destination is the ISG faction Hatip Hajan Sawajaan in Patikul. So there were a few figures involved in this network. Here, I put Apo Mike here because at this moment, Apo Mike occasionally went into hiding or coordinated with Hatip Hajan Sawajan when it comes to escaping or countering military operation in Sulu. But Apo Mike was and still is responsible largely for kidnap for ransom. Actually, there is no actual incident that Apo Mike involved in any terrorist operation in Sulu. And also there was also Talha Jumsa and his wife Almaida Marani Salafin, who were responsible for the Lamitan and Holo bombing and helped facilitate the Luli and Ulfa family once they arrived in Sulu Archipelago in early 2019. Next slide. Here is the impact of ESCOM crackdown in Sabah East Coast. Is the Andi Baso network in Keningau. This graph is just a simplification to show the relationship between the network, which is Andi Baso and then Yoga Febrianto, a 21-year-old Indonesian who was from Samarinda, but he migrated to Caningao in around October 2018 to join Andi Baso. And there was also Luli and Ulfa family and Rizky Fantasia, their daughter alias Chichi, who married Andi Baso during their stay in Caningao. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
So what was the impact of ESCOM crackdown in the eastern coast regions of Sabah? I think one of the impact that rarely been discussed is the exodus of illegal migrants from especially Filipinos and Indonesian migrants to the interior part of Sabah, and then the surging industry at the palm plantation, especially in Caningao and Tenom. For example, the arrest of Yoga Febrianto in Caningao in May 2019, a couple of months after the holo bombing. So his trial trial disposition showed that revealed that he was invited by Andi Baso in October 2018 to join him in Caningao, working as a palm plantation worker, as what the Andi Baso did at that time. He took the route from Samarinda to Balikpapan by car, and then to Tawau by flight, and no, by ferry, and then to Kota Kinabalu by commercial flight. And then he took train to Caningao before joining with Andi Baso. There, Yoga became the facilitator of Andi Baso, who helped several other Indonesians to go to Sulu Archipelago. For instance, Yoga was the one who helped Duli and Ulfa family to move to Kuningao before they departed with Andi Baso to Sulu. They took the route from Kota Kinabalu to Sandakan with a ferry to Zamboanga, and then they were picked up by Talha Jimsa and Hatip Hajan Sawajaan men at in Zamboanga, and then to Sulu to Holo. So, as I said before, the ESCOM crackdowns led to exodus of not only illegal migrants, which this case show, but also extremist networks to relocate to the interior part of Sabah, working as palm plantation. Why? Because it is easier to hide from the authorities by hiding in the plantation in the jungle than hiding in the water villages in the eastern coast of Sabah. And statistically speaking, ASEAS did a report in 2018 and showed that and found that 84% of plantation laborers are migrants. And I think, and the study also showed that most of the workers who work at the plantation were illegal because they can avoid the local authorities' scrutiny, checking their migrant status. Next. So,
Sorry, Deka, one more minute, okay?
Yeah, thinking about the new and future motivation for cross-border terrorism. So this is where the Suryadi Masud a firearm purchase come back to the story. There are still 30 firearms somewhere in Zamboanga. The five pistols managed to be shipped back to Indonesia and used during the Tamrin attack in 2016. But the majority of the rifles were still somewhere in Zamboanga. And then the money has already been paid for these firearms. So people from the affiliated to Lois and Suryadi Masud are still looking forward to get these firearms back to Indonesia. So this is one motivation. Also, the newly released influential prisoners in the 3 countries who might influence cross-border terrorism. This include Yazid Sufaat, member, Malaysian extremist who was released, I think, sometimes this year or last year. And then this kind of person, some influential prisoners who are a former member of GI or who has a connection with Mindanao might influence future cross-border terrorism. And also the structural factors. If BARM failed to live up to their expectation to bring peace and reconstruction to Mindanao, and also conflict between MNLF Nur Miswari and MNLF Jikiri faction, these are all the structural factors that could create another insecurity factors in Mindanao, which become a loophole for extremists in Southeast Asia to go to Mindanao to hide or to train or for the fugitive to hide. Next slide for the last presentation. This is, I think our IPAC always provide this recommendation. I think that we need better understandings of the nature of cross-border terrorism, especially through the academic and scholar perspective. I think there needs to be more funding for anthropological and ethnographic studies in the Sulawesi region, especially better understanding of inter-ethnic relations among migrants in the Sulawesi, and also encourage more regional studies for the Philippine authorities, Indonesian and Malaysian, and then study on, especially the one that we're still missing are the language program, to have Malaysian and Indonesian scholars and authorities to study more about study of Tagalog and regional languages, including Tausug and Maranao. And lastly, but not least, is the in-depth research on the changing role of women and extremism in Mindanao. I think that's all for this long presentation. I hope we can discuss more about it and then talk about more in detail in the question and answer session.
Okay, thank you, Deka. This is very comprehensive presentation, and your presentation is bringing a new challenge for us because you mentioned about new pattern and new destinations. So this is the challenge for our government. So we go now to Pak Pribadi, because Pak Pribadi told me that he only can join us until 3 o'clock. So I'm sorry, Pak Pribadi, you only have 10 minutes, but I hope you maybe can extend a bit more, maybe 5 or 10 minutes more, yeah? So to save time, because you only have a short time, Pak Pribadi. So Pak Pribadi is actually the Assistant Deputy of Coordinating Ministry of Politics and Legal Security Affairs. And he's also adjuncting lecturer in Sarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, and he was a diplomat before. And I think until today, until present, yeah, he's still a diplomat at Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Deputy of Chief of Missions, Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia. Pak Pribadi has a PhD from Victorian University of Wellington and his master's degree from Griffith University and bachelor degree from University of Indonesia. So to save time, Pak Pribadi, this is yours, your floor now to share with us what is the government doing so far and what is the challenges and solution that you can give to us, the civil society. What can we do to the civil society to support the government in preventing these violence extremisms, counter the cross-border terrorism act. So, Pak Pribadi, please. Sorry for the short time.
Yeah, sorry, Ibu.
Minute,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ibu?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you
okay,
well.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, and to Pakar and Surf, and also to all the members of the panelists. And also my apology that I have to run after this around 3 or 3:10 o'clock. So hopefully that I can explain this a little bit more about this. All the panelists, all the distinguished persons already explained about what is the challenges or what's happening during the last maybe 5 or 10 years on the cross-border terrorism. But here I just want to, I don't know, maybe because I was intrigued by Ibu Dete on the word of solution. So probably I should talk about the solution. Next slide. Well, everyone's already discussed about what is the challenges, but now what is the issues that we have to face now? As you know that now the growing threat of radicalism leading to violent extremism and terrorism in Southeast Asia is, whether we like it or not, whether there is a COVID pandemic or not, but the fact that it's still happening, and some people said this actually is increasing. And also because we still remember the fall of the ISIS, it caused the return, quote unquote, the return of the FTF to their own country, or maybe to the other new places, or even they just go back and then transit in somewhere and then they will stay there. My apology for the typo. And also the last one is about the growing of a technology that might also increase the cross-border terrorism. Next. So what we should do is we have to respond this one collectively, in a manner that is coordinated and strategic, and pursue at all level of the government together with the private sectors. Some of the panelists already mentioned about the role of the CSO. Even Ibu Dete just mentioned about what is the role of the civil society in dealing with this. For sure, it should start from our domestic issues, from our own. Like in Indonesia, we strengthen our domestic regulations. We have a quote unquote the new terrorist law, law number 5, 2018, which is I will explain later about what is the new. And also we have to build and strengthen partnership among the governments in our region here. For sure that the bilateral meetings on the city counterterrorism is very important. Also, there was mentioned that about the trilateral meeting on security among the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, as well as the sub-regional meeting on foreign terrorist fighters and cross-border terrorism. We also have to, what we call the tightening the border security in the Southeast Asia. Collaboration between the government, especially on also including involving the role of the woman. And not to mention also the importance of the role of the media in countering extremist narrative, which is, you may know that it might incite people to go somewhere outside their own country. And also, last but not least, for sure, the role of the private sectors, including, for example, the social media platform, what you call it, the money transfer company, like there are so many, which is sometimes very difficult to trace. So that's the idea that I think what we should do in our region or in our sub-region in handling these situations. Next, I was talking about the how we strengthen our national strategies. If you see, next slide, please. Yes, in Indonesia we have law number 5, 2018, as in the umbrella regulations, which is the new element of the law include on criminalizing any people, any persons. Please go back, please. Yes, thank you very much. The new element of the law includes criminalizing any individual joining the FTF, and also criminalizing persons who support others to join any terrorist groups as FTF. And so many new elements of this new law, which is, I think, is very important in how we handling the terrorists and including the cross-border terrorism. Next, I mentioned about the bilateral relations, bilateral discussions about countries in Indonesia, especially in the Kemenko Polhukam, the legal and political, legal and security affairs. We have some bilateral and regional counterterrorism high-level dialogues, like here that I mentioned: Indonesia, Australia, Indonesia, People's Republic of China, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, Russia, and so on. Even in ASEAN, we have an ASEAN Minister meeting on transnational crime, Defense Minister meeting, and so on. Next, the thing that I think is very intriguing for us is what we call this sub-regional meeting on the FTF and cross-border terrorism. It's a meeting between the sub-regional countries that aim to strengthen cooperation and combating terrorism and countering violent radicalism in the region. The participating countries include Australia, Brunei, Darussalam, and Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. The interesting thing of this one is at the first meeting of the sub-regional meeting in Manado, we already mentioned about the need or the importance of the role of the CSO. In our joint statement, we mentioned that the government, we don't know how strong it is, but still need a collaboration with the what you call it, with the CSO. In the sub-regional meeting, there are so many cooperation that we already we propose to have, but not only proposing, but also we make it as a concrete program, including the issues on countering violent extremism, regional assessment on maritime security, cooperation on cyber security. The cyber security of the 9 countries has a very close relations, and also we broaden our law, justice, and security cooperation, the terrorist financing, also the strengthening the role of women, as someone mentioned that now the terrorists is also include a woman and children. We were talking about and discussing about the prisons management, de-radicalization program, and so on. So those are the cooperation that we already have now with the sub-regional meeting, and the next meeting of this sub-regional meeting will be on the 1st of December 2020, with the agenda for sure is about the impact of the COVID-19 on the counterterrorism and transnational security environment, as well as foreign terrorist fighters, regional preparedness. So next, I just want to bring up a new issue, quote unquote, that now the government of Indonesia is trying to handle. Next, as we already aware that in Syria, after the fall of the ISIS there, so many was still in the Al-Hoj and Al-Roj camp, and probably some there is also Indonesians who still left behind there. So the Indonesian government tried to have a kind of a policy, which is what we call it a policy of well, we categorize it into 3 steps in quote unquote returning those FTF in Syria. First, the step is before borders, which is we have to identify and also verify those, are they really Indonesian or not? Because as you know that Indonesian are similar with the Malaysian also similar with the Sulu people, the southern part of the Philippines, and also with the Bruneian, as well as other part of like the southern part of the Thailand, for example. So we make a effort on identifying and verification, make a verification on those. For those who are sure that Indonesian, based on those two effort, identification and verifications, they might be bring back to Indonesia. But before they enter the borders, they have to go to the what we call it the repatriation process, which is the repatriation process is also include the identification again and verification again of those and other process in that stage. And the after borders for sure is after we filtered them, and then it's come to the rehabilitation and the reintegration process. This is mostly will be conducted in Indonesia after they enter the borders. Those who eligible, we decided as is the orphans, which is under 10 years old. That's the political decisions for sure, because there was a very what you call it very strong critics and also support of the policy of the government. One thing that we should understand on this policy is that we need also approval from the persons who would like to be returned to Indonesia, and also the family in Indonesia. The reason for us to have this kind of a policy is because we have an experience that the person who return to Indonesia, actually they don't want to be returned to Indonesia, and then he or she has been you know, they go they went out again, and I know that some of them now in Afghanistan. And also in why we need the permission of the consent of the family, because you know some of the family, they don't want to be linked with the other member of a family who has a connection with the FTF or the ISIS or the terrorists, and also the kampung. Some kampung even rejected the corpse of the, you know, the death of the terrorists. So we also have to request this two other consent from the persons itself and also from the family in Indonesia. And last but not least, for sure, how about now in the situation of the COVID pandemic 19? Probably we should say that the act of the terrorism, the fact is not decreasing, even there is a pandemic. But in some part of Indonesia or the Philippines, or even other part of this sub-region in Southeast Asia, they also seems to be increased. It's not that much as before, but there is also a movement by them to be. But at the other side of the coin, the pandemic or the COVID-19 is also kind of a blessing in disguise. For example, a lot of countries ban a certain citizen of a country to enter the country, for example, and vice versa. For example, Indonesia also be banned by other countries, but Indonesia also banned other nations to enter, simply because of we don't want to have a kind of a spread out of this pandemic. But this is, I believe, this is kind of a blessing in disguise in this situation. But does it mean that our work is decreasing? I don't think so, because now the process, as I mentioned before, the situation is still worrying to us. The recent bombing in the Philippines proved that one, and also some of the arrests by the Indonesian Densus 88. Also, the number is not decreasing, but slightly. It's not decreasing, but slightly increasing. So I think I should stop there. And I just want to sum up at the end of my presentation, the last, this is what we should do. Information sharing, synchronizing priorities, and also the last, yes, law enforcement, intelligence agency from across the region, understanding the cooperation between the government in the region and the need to include CSO, as I mentioned before, seeking collaboration action between the government and CSO actors in the sub-region in promoting religious tolerance, increasing collaboration with social media platform companies, device manufacturers, communications, and so on. But there is also a challenge for this is, I think, how we change the mindset of the government and civil society in having this kind of a cooperation among the two. As you know, that usually there is a kind of a distrust among, even between the government's agencies, and as well as among the civil society organization, as well as between the government and the civil society. That's the challenge, another challenge that we should overcome. I think I should stop there. Thank you very much, and I still can take stay in about 5 minutes before I have to go. Thank you very much, Ibu Dete, and also Pakar. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera.
Halo Mbak Dete.
Sorry. Hai ya. Terima kasih Pak Pribadi atas presentasinya yang luar biasa, dan ini menarik karena Pak Pribadi menyampaikan kepada kita tantangan-tantangan dan juga ajakan sebenarnya. Ini ada terakhir gimana kita melakukan kolaborasi dengan pemerintah ya. Now, what kind of concrete collaboration that we can have, Pak Pribadi, before you leave the room, yeah, because you have to go in 5 minutes. What kind of concrete collaboration, especially for the region, say for the Southeast Asian, that we can do? I mean, what kind of concrete collaboration between civil society and the governments, whether Asian have the forum or the Indonesian can take initiative to create the forum, and then you will be kind of like the focal point for the governments to share this, or what kind of concrete collaboration that we can do to prevent the cross-border terrorism?
Well,
what kind of mechanism that we can do?
Sure, Ibu Dete. I think
we can have, I mean.
Yes, if I may, Ibu Dete, I think as I mentioned, even the government should collaborate with the other governments in the sub-regional. That for sure. That's one.
Yeah.
Second one, we should also include the CSO as part of this effort, because I'm sure with the limitations, the government itself cannot do everything by itself. Should also be collaborate with the CSO. Remember that usually the CSO is the one who knows up until in the grassroots. But the challenge, Ibu, I think as I mentioned, the challenge is how we create this trust among these two, the government and as you know, that the sub-regional meeting is already starting this kind of effort by having the CSO forum on sub-regional meeting on counterterrorism. It was in 2018. It was in Lombok, right before the earthquake at that time. And last year, we had also a CSO forum on counterterrorism, which is held in Bali, sponsored by Australia and Indonesia as well. And this year, hopefully, we are having this one as well by the end of October. Those are those meetings are aimed, as to fight together between the government and the CSO to tackle this issue. There are so many concrete programs, Ibu, and then we collaborate. Even like if you remember the formation or the formulation of the National Action Plan of the CVE of Indonesia was also part of the collaboration between the CSO and the government. I think that's a good start, and then we can do many things as well in many areas. Thank you, Ibu.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Pribadi. Thank you very much. Nanti mungkin kita bisa bikin apakah ada semacam ya apa ya Pak, kayak center or tempat pengaduan, pos pengaduan gitu loh, yang bisa diinisiasi misalnya oleh pemerintah Indonesia. Misalnya teman-teman dari Filipina punya informasi, terus bisa report ke satu center gitu loh. This is what I mean. Apakah we can have it this kind of forum, apa the like center ya, apa sih namanya,
pusat data,
lupa deh Pak. Jadi tempat pengaduan gitu ya, tempat atau tempat di mana semua member kita nih di Asian Bank, dan dia bisa report ke tempat itu gitu loh. Maksud saya kalau dari Malaysia nih, mereka punya informasi terus dia mau share ke pemerintah di ASEAN, dia bisa tinggal langsung share ke situ gitu maksudnya, supaya langsung langsung di spread ke pemerintah masing-masing. Nah, apakah yang seperti itu akan ada atau gimana tuh Pak?
Well,
maaf nih sebelum ke pembicara lain, mumpung Pak Pribadi masih di sini.
Probably we can, Bu, but I'm sure. I mean, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it cannot be blend effort between the government and the CSO for that one. Maybe CSO has to have one, and the government also has to have one, and they have the mechanism how to connect between the two. But if you try at the moment, if you try to blend it, I don't think it's going to be effective. We should do understand, even among the government, exchange the information is also sometimes difficult. So not to mention the sometimes. So but it's a positive idea, and I don't see that it's an impossible one. And anything is possible, Bu, especially for pakar and serve portion.
Iya, oke deh. Ya, thank you Pak Pribadi. Terima kasih banyak. Ini kita bisa coba wujudkan ya, your advice. Have the CSO have their own groups, and then the government has their own groups, and then we can access information. Yeah.
There is a question from Emmy Chu.
Happen.
Ibu Emmy, can I? There is a question from Ibu Emmy.
Okay,
can I just later on ya?
Dan terima kasih. Ya.
Ya Ibu, I have to go.
Terima kasih Pak Pribadi, dan terima kasih. Thank you for this. And if I check the chat room, some actually ask to the panelists, to the speakers, like we have two questions. One is to Amina and one to Afik. But I saw Afik already answered in the chat room. So, but I think we can still share. I mean, we can still discuss about the questions. Ruby, the questions from Ruby to Ate Amina is about to share about the new policy on counterterrorism, why CSO resisting so much. Yeah, I'm wondering if you can also elaborate in what way the autonomous regions will confidently reduce motivations of people to join with PE. This is the question for Ate Amina from Ruby, and also to ask about whether the madrasah in the Philippines belong to ISIS or not. Ini cucunya repot ini. And also question dari Pak Sigit itu ke Jo ya. The question from Pak Sigi to Joe, his question is, could you explain to us, is there any specific narrative of framing constructed by various insurgent groups like the MILF, Abu Sayyaf, etc. in Mindanao to attract foreign fighters to come and fight under their banner? Is it ideology motive or strategic purposes where the insurgent groups wish to increase their resources? And the questions from Pak Sigit to Deka, in all generation of Indonesian jihadists who went to Mindanao like the Darul Islam and Jamaah Islamiyah mostly aim to receive military training and war experience rather than purely ideological driven. What is about the new generation of Indonesian jihadists who travel in this region in the 2010s? Yeah? What is their motivation? Could you tell any difference between them in terms of ideology, motivations to join and leave the conflict? Thank you. Ini Deka udah jawab ya. So that is the questions, I think. Please, Amina and Deka and also Joe, could you answer the questions that asked by you by the participant? Maybe Amina can answer first. Please, Ate Amina.
Thank you. The questions raised by Ruby with regards the new anti-terror law. Let me just state at the offset that we have been in my country having a lot of setbacks in the protection of human rights defenders. So it is natural that advocates for human rights are going to be very uncomfortable with any new law that would essentially strengthen the powers of the state, especially the security establishment, and in many ways weaken the powers of institutions that protect human rights. So this is a natural effect of the passage of that law. Let me also state that the law was passed not just with violent extremists who are faith-based are concerned. This was passed, I think, largely also to deal with the terrorist threat coming from the New People's Army, the communist-based insurgency in our country that conduct terroristic attacks in many communities and are very well entrenched in a large segment of the whole country, not just in Mindanao. So that's a short answer to Ruby's question. I wanted to pick up on this issue about the ISIS and the madrasa. I discussed the survey findings of the SWS because I wanted to paint a picture of the thinking and the emotions, the perspectives of the average citizen who are in conflict-affected Muslim Mindanao, particularly Marawi, Lanao del Sur, and Maguindanao. And the survey does not show any strong orientation towards violent extremism, even though these people who were interviewed come from the most directly affected communities. While the trust levels for the religious, the Muslim religious, are very high, higher than the trust ratings for government officials, this in no way had any push for a support to extremist thinking, which therefore lets us conclude that most of the madrasas in Muslim Mindanao have no links with any kind of ISIS ideology. However, let me also state that because of the influx of missionaries coming from the Middle East, Pakistan, and other very strongly fundamentalist-oriented Muslim countries, we have seen over the past 50 years a more rigid implementation of Islam, a veering towards fundamentalist interpretations of Islam, which is not to say that this is veering towards a violent extremist thought. So no, that was a long answer to say no. Most of our madrasas are not linked to ISIS, and we're very thankful for that. A bit on the tabligh. The tabligh is a phenomenon that we have experienced in Muslim Mindanao for decades now. And it has always been a very peaceful event wherever it took place, gathering thousands, and then the last was, I think, at least 100,000 faithful to come together and affirm their faith. In fact, it is so big that politicians have been going to the tabligh gatherings and have been supporting it, providing funding, providing food. So peaceful. But in the hands of a few very, very shrewd extremists, it can certainly be manipulated or can be used as a cover to come in, which is what happened in Marawi. The gathering of the tabligh was used as a cover for some of the ASG to enter, but they were discovered, and it was in the manner of the apprehension of the Abu Sayyaf that started the Marawi siege. So I hope those answered the questions of Ruby and the others. Tete, can you hear me? Tete? Can you hear me?
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, it's
Yes, we
just
can hear you.
Okay.
just
I would like to respond to Mbak Ruby question first on the Jamaat Tabligh. My observation from Malaysia, most of the Jamaat Tabligh in Malaysia are genuine. But the problem with the Jamaah Tabligh, for instance, in the case of Marawi, unlike Indonesia, we don't have any proper registration, meaning that whoever wanted to go to, for instance, Marawi Islamic Centers to attend the Ijtima or anything, we don't have any proper record. So the government didn't monitor at all. So this has been used by the terrorist group since the time of the JI, just to infiltrate or just to piggyback the movement. Based on my interview, they said they went to Marawi, they will stay there for 1 or 2 days, and then they will go out to do their work, and then they will come back to the Marawi, to the center of Ijtima as if nothing happened. This has been going on for a very long time. Unlike Indonesia, when I was in Marawi, I did ask, and they said they have a proper registration, meaning that the Jamaah Tabligh in Indonesia, they have the record. Whoever came out from Indonesia to the Marawi Islamic Center, for instance. So I think that is a problem in Malaysia. Second problem in Malaysia is that, especially in Sabah because there are a lot of stateless. Stateless issue is one of the important issue in Malaysia. So we went to one of the madrasah in the Peninsula Malaysia in Penang, because we know there are connection between this madrasah and another madrasah in Sabah. So most of the stateless in Sabah, they don't have proper registration. But what they did, they will buy ICs or identity card from the person who died, and then they will go to the public school, and then they will go to this madrasah. They will learn how to memorize the Quran. After 3 years, they will be sent to Peninsula Malaysia to continue their aliyah or higher certificate program. So some of the recruitment happen here. We don't want to blame the madrasah per se, but we will see that they are utilizing the mechanism, they are utilizing the modus operandi, because most of the madrasah have lack of control mechanism. It is not just happen in Sabah and not happen in other states. In fact, in Selangor itself, we have a private Islamic school which are fully funded. They have a lot of good facilities, but most of the students who were sent to Pakistan came from this school, and they attended the Usrah at that time by Imam Samudra and Abu Bakar Ba'ashir, for instance. So I did ask the mudir or the principal of the school, and they said they didn't know because they don't have control. They don't know what's going on with the teacher. But once they figure out that there's a problem, that the teacher tried to recruit their student, they will expel the teacher, but too late, because when they expel the teacher, the student will every weekend will go to the place, to the teacher's place, and to listen to the usra. That is for the Jama'at Tabligh. And I think the same situation maybe happen in any other country. We can't solely blame the madrasa, like Ma'had Ittiba' Sunnah in Kuala Pilah, for instance. They are not propagating the jihadist ideology, but because of the lack in administrative structure and surveillance, that make people this group easily infiltrate the school and madrasa. The same trend we can see among female or women. We had interviewed a few women who participate in the Usrah. At least there are two places. First, their background is that they came from a jihadist family, and second, they think they have the obligation to continue what their father or their brothers and sisters footpath. So we met with second semester students who involved in the usra, or the study circle, that I can say have the more or less similar ideology as ISIS, because when we talk further, it's very disturbing. Yeah, I think that is for the tabligh and for the girl. I think. Thank you.
Okay. Terima kasih, Afiq, for your answer. I'm really sorry, friends, that my connection is suddenly off. So then I really disappear from you. It's vanished for a while, but I'm back. I'm here again. Sorry for the technical problem. I'm really sorry. Today is really worse. I mean, I have so many technical problems, issues with during this discussion. So I think maybe can answer the questions from the Pak Sigit who are given to. Hello, Joe. Are you there?
Here. Sorry, I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Those are really.
When my connection off, but you got a question.
Say again. Oh yeah. So I got the questions, and I just want to, before I head into them, I just want to follow through with Miss Amina Razul came out with the role of madrasa. So in my own research, what I saw was that there was a very limited impact of what madrasas did when it comes to radicalizing individuals in Mindanao. And one of the examples that I encountered, especially during fieldwork in Zamboanga, is about how, if you look at the original, the founders of the Abu Sayyaf group, they were all classmates, they were all batchmates, they came from the same technical vocational school. And it's a very similar experience of sorts. And I believe I would recommend everyone to look at IPAC. Came out with a research. No, it was either IPAC or it was Sydney Jones writing in behalf of IPAC, wherein she looked at the cell that was involved in the Davao bombings, and they came from the Cotabato City Technological College. So what you see actually, in these sorts of networks, right? It's less about the madrasas, but I would make an argument that it's actually it's more a technical school issue, right? If there's something that authority should look at, it's not the religious institutions at all. It might be something else. So yeah, so now I'm gonna go to the question that was posed to me, whether or not what were the motivations, what were the narratives used to exhort people to come in, and I think Deka presented it nicely. He somehow answered the question that there's the narrative, especially from Daesh and the propagandists, was that if you can't come to Syria, if you can't come to Iraq, just go to the Philippines. It's closer, and probably it's unstated. It wasn't stated that flights would probably be cheaper, especially they're coming from Southeast Asia, right? So there's that. There's like a top-down push for telling people to go to Mindanao. But when you look within the groups, right? And I think I'm not alone in this assessment. Like the Marawi, the siege of Marawi, it was like showing off. It was like it was a way to get the attention of the talent scouts, so to speak. And especially the smaller groups, like some of the ASG factions and the BIFF factions, they wanted to post foreign fighters with the expectation that money is gonna come from overseas. But again, like I mentioned in my earlier presentation, they were fairly disappointed because apparently some of the FTFs that came in didn't have money with them. And what money they had was largely, like Becca said, it was for purchasing arms to bring back to their own respective fields of battle. So that's that. So yeah, I'm not sure if Ibu Dete, if you got everything, but I think those are the responses to the questions that were posed to me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much Joe, for your answer to the questions. And we can go to Deka to answer the questions that given to you by Pak Sigit. Please, Deka.
Yes, I didn't answer it fully in the chat, but
Already,
as I mentioned in the question about in the 2010, there was actually no urgent reason to go to Mindanao, because especially when it comes to capacity building training camps, as we remember, there were plenty of it in Indonesia emerging already, especially with the largest one in Aceh, where the police and the military finally conducted operation in February 2010, and then eventually the arrest of Abu Bakar Bashir and Aman Abdul Rahman. But in mid 2010, I don't think there were that many Indonesians who went to Mindanao, which later changed in 2014 to 2015. However, when about the question on the new generation and the ideology of motivation, this is the story of Ruli and Ulfa family that can reveal new interests, especially a new reason, especially when it comes to deportants and returnees who didn't fulfill their ambition to go to Syria. Then they become deportants and they went to Philippines, not for capacity building, not to purchase arms, but just to commit amalia, to die. Not even to die by gunfighting, but to die as suicide bombers. So maybe we can expect to see this kind of new trend coming from the new generation of potential cross-border terrorists in the future. Itu mungkin
Sudah,
gitu.
Deka?
Ya.
Are you done?
Ya.
Ya, oke. Terima kasih Deka. Ini artinya saya baca pakai bahasa dua bahasa ya. Ini artinya bahwa sekarang challenge kita semakin, tantangan kita semakin kompleks ya, karena kalau dulu orang-orang Indonesia pergi ke Filipina untuk belajar, dan kalau lihat kemarin waktu di Marawi Seeds ini dia pakai strategi baru ya. Strategi barunya adalah urban war, itu bukan lagi gerilya seperti yang dulu dilakukan oleh MILF. Sekarang udah mereka sekarang melakukan urban war, yang ini menurut saya pola baru, pertarungan baru, teknik baru yang itu kalau dicontoh repot juga, ini bisa berbahaya juga ini ya, karena ini semacam apa yang terjadi di Filipina, di Marawi ini adalah a new trend yang kamu bisa lakukan gitu loh. Menurut saya, takutnya saya seperti itu ya. Jadi Joe and Amina, what I said, what I respond to Deka, that what is happening in Marawi is actually already a shifting of war. It's no longer guerrillas like the MILF do in the past, but now it's a kind of like urban war, a city war, because it is happened in Marawi city, yeah. And then the strategy, the tactic is very different, because I saw there and I went there and I saw that they do, there is a new method. Then this is what we are afraid of, that what is happening in Marawi can be duplicated in other country. Yeah, so because they learn from the experience in Marawi, that is actually my concern. So itu saja. Is there any other questions? Ada pertanyaan lain Bapak Ibu sebelum kita tutup? Bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia loh kalau mau nanya, nggak harus bahasa Inggris. Dan saya minta maaf ini tidak bisa menerjemahkan semua. kalau masih ada pertanyaan, monggo, silakan. Atau mau kontak langsung dengan pembicaranya bisa nanti hubungin saya. Saya maaf pakai nama apa orang lain, nama adik saya ini Rifa Zainani, tapi ini saya di Italia ya. Jadi bisa kontak saya misalnya mau bertanya ke pembicara langsung, nanti saya kasih alamat email atau nomor teleponnya. Oh ini ada yang mau tanya, silakan Pak Muji ya. Pak Muji apa Mbak Muji? Silakan Mbak. Mau langsung atau mau langsung aja kali ya. Jadi nggak perlu diketik ya, bisa langsung tanya aja ya. Jadi lebih live juga, biar sekalian juga lebih cepat waktunya. Ya Mbak Muji? Silakan bisa di-unmute aja. Mas Taufik boleh di-unmute Mbak Mujinya? Halo, Mas Taufik.
Ya.
Ya,
halo.
Oke, silakan Mbak Muji.
Mbak Dete mau nanya nih untuk teman-teman
lanjut.
di NGO, apakah pernah ada pengalaman jika kawan-kawan FTF ini menggunakan perbatasan darat atau laut, dan kira-kira siapa sih yang paling bertanggung jawab jika mereka melalui perbatasan? Kan kita sudah ada PLBN nih yang ada di kawasan Kalimantan Utara, Kalimantan Barat, Kalimantan Timur. Jika mereka ingin ke Malaysia atau dari Sulawesi Utara pengen ke Mindanao, apakah otoritas kita atau perangkat hukum kita sudah mampu untuk menanggapi fenomena FTF ini? Dan kira-kira kementerian apa yang terlibat dalam menangani FTF ini? Itu aja Mbak Dete.
Oke, terima kasih Mbak Muji.
Terima kasih.
Terus saya terjemahkan dulu ya, karena Pak pribadinya udah nggak ada ini. Tapi mungkin teman-teman yang lain bisa menjawab ya. So the question from Mbak Muji for Amina and Joe, the question from Mbak Muji is the NGOs have experience which road actually the radicals group use? Are they using the land, the sea, or the air? Yeah, usually. And then who actually responsible to handle this? Is it our government? Which institution that have to be responsible to handle this? The mobilization of these groups. Is it our government? I mean, the Indonesian government or the other country government? I mean, the Philippines. If they want to cross to the Philippines, is it responsibility of the government, the Philippines government, or the Malaysian government? So this is the questions of Muji. Anybody can answer?
Miss Amina
Siapa yang
can
mau
go
jawab
ahead
dulu?
if she wants.
Apakah Deka, Afik?
Mbak
Amina. Siapa?
Age before beauty.
Amina. Ate Amina dulu ya.
Well, yeah. We do
the beautiful first. Yeah, Ate Amina, please.
Age first. Senior citizen first. We do have agreements with ASEAN.
Okay. Senior citizen first.
The principal burden rests on the shoulders of our governments, and they need to cooperate very, very strongly to manage our borders. We have very porous borders. It is virtually impossible to monitor the sea traffic, and one of the positive things about COVID is that it hampers the flights of violent extremists to areas in the Philippines from countries like, say, Indonesia or Syria. But on the other hand, the private sector and civil society have a very strong role to play. And in a way, I sort of disagree with the idea that we have to separate the communities of civil society and government as they work on prevention or countering violent extremism. The UN, ASEAN, our governments have talked about the whole of society approach, and this is the only way we're going to succeed. Time, funds, resources are very limited, And if we do not have a strategy and a platform for cooperation, we are going to lose out in dealing with these problems. Thank you. Yung gwapon susunod.
Okay, Joe, are you still there?
Okay.
Now.
Okay. Oh yeah. So great questions again. When it comes to transnational responses, it was quite interesting when there was a senior Indonesian minister, I think, as official, who said like, "Oh, we'd be willing to go on a hot pursuit operation against militants crossing from Indonesia to Philippine waters." That was fairly interesting. But I guess any response to FTFs, it would have to rely mostly on something that are behind the scenes intelligence exchanges, right? Because there's a lot of press, there's a lot of reporting about joint patrols, but I mean, how effective really are those trilateral patrols? I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest. Miss Amina mentioned something about it's a very porous border. It is a very porous border, and I think in the early part of the decade, there were an estimated like the low end estimate is like 66 ungazetted ports, and that's not counting all of the private ports all around the region. But again, big caveat, like what Deca said, and what IPAC has written about extensively, is that a lot of the routes that are being used are legal. These guys are flying into airports, so I mean, it's very Hollywood when you think about, oh yeah, we need to get our patrol boats, our navies, we got drones flying around the waters intercepting militants. But the reality is the way that they're getting into our respective countries, it's actually very boring. So it's very straightforward. You tighten up immigration, you tighten up intelligence exchanges. I mean, patrols are nice, but there's very real limits to it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Joe. It's very interesting your comment. When I went to Manado, to the border, and then that when people hungry, when people doesn't have money, they are willing to transport people. They are willing to to bring people. Then they can reach themselves. So this is the question: how effective actually the bilateral agreement or the agreement between country to country, ya? So this is very challenge questions. So Deka, mungkin Deka bisa jawab pakai bahasa Indonesia ya Kak ya?
Ya, pakai
silakan,
bahasa
Deka.
Indonesia ya.
Bahasa Indonesia
Jadi
aja, biar aku nggak terjemahin.
IPAC sudah terutama laporan yang saya tulis, the report that I written specifically, reportnya adalah terkait Sulawesi. Dan dari awal kita sudah sangat kritis terhadap trilateral cooperative joint patrol karena hot pursuit kayak itu tidak mungkin. Hot pursuit is impossible. Like itu cuman ya agenda aja. There is no way Indonesian military would enter Philippine territory. Because why? Because Indonesian will not accept any Filipinos or Malaysian Navy to enter Indonesia for whatever reason. Impossible. Jadi itu istilahnya retorika for the media. In actuality sebenarnya nggak ada. Joint patrol itu 4 kali setahun. It's 4 years in 1 year for the joint patrol. Akhirnya jadi sebenarnya kebijakan itu berangkat dari negara masing-masing, yaitu imigrasi dan kepolisian. Bagaimana information sharing antara imigrasi dan polis itu harus efektif. Karena sebagian besar orang yang diintervensi ketika mau ke Marawi, most of the people who got intervened going to Marawi were stopped by the immigration. Jadi dari imigrasi ya di stopnya. Jadi efektif prevensi CVE CVE dalam hal ini adalah berangkat dari kerjasama kepolisian dan imigrasi, bagaimana mereka bisa memberikan notis ke imigrasi dan untuk membantu orang-orang imigrasi untuk mencegah suspected ekstremis di border area. Karena seperti yang Joe tadi bilang, sebagian besar menggunakan formal route, either ferry atau pesawat, commercial plane. Karena not everyone are well connected atau know how to contact or use pelabuhan tikus atau illegal dog or illegal traffickers. Tidak semua orang tahu jalur ini, dan rata-rata itu kembali ke barter trade economic practice in Sabah. Karena di Sabah yang dituduhkan pelaku barter trade, the suspect were the barter trade people. Tapi padahal tidak ada bukti, there is no evidence that any barter trade economic practice were being used for violent extremism. Tidak ada buktinya ada pelaku ekonomi di antara Sabah itu terutama barter trade terlibat dalam violent extremism. Justru dari kasus Andi Baso, Cici, dan orang-orang yang di Marawi, mereka ya semua pakai ferry, dan orang seperti Adi Jihadi, Ahmad Supriyanto itu semua tertangkap di imigrasi. Jadi information sharing ya antara lembaga pemerintah dalam negeri, baik polisi dan imigrasi, dan antar tiga negara itu yang paling penting. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Deka.
Mbak Diti,
masih...
if I want to add something,
Iya, saya mau kamu memang.
On the issue of border control, I totally agree with other resource person, but I think what is important when it comes to border control is to balance the real imminent danger of allowing potential terrorists to come into our territory. And we need to balance the real human rights cases. For instance, the refugee who came and seeking for refuge and help, because we do. I mean, as a country, we are subscribing or we are under a duty not to decline or reject any what we call it the real refugee. We have this non-refoulement principle under the public international law that the government must accept the refugee that came to our country to seek refuge. I think in terms of policy or lawmaking, we need to balance between these two.
Oke, ya. Ini ada pertanyaan lagi dari Mas Badrus sebelum kita tutup, sebelum kita masih punya 4 menit. Silakan Mas Badrus, langsung aja. Mas Taufik, tolong Mas Badrus di unmute. Silakan Mas Badrus. Halo, Mas Badrus.
Thank you. I have a few on the border. I think the problem, like Deka said, is yes, in terms of military cooperation, I think we should protect our border. But in terms of border security, I think cooperation between government and civil society is important, and it's working actually. I went to Nunukan in the border of Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, in Pulau Sebatik. There are some partnership among civil society, police, and military. But yes, it's too many jalan tikus, and I think we have problem with economy. There are still illegal smuggler working there as well as narcotic drug business in the border. So that's the problem in the border, not only terrorism but also economy, border business, and many problem that we should solve among Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines. I think the government should work together as well as cooperation among civil society. That's my comment on it, Mbak Dite.
Okay, terima kasih Mas Badrus. Thank you very much, Mas Badrus. This is actually my concern since long time ago because I'm really concerned about the collaboration between state and non-state actors for the cross-border terrorism. So actually, I have I have already proposed the idea to build a kind like a collaboration, a concrete. That's why I asked Pak Pribadi, what kind of concrete collaboration that we can do between the civil society and the government. Do we need to make a kind like reporting house or what a center like that? Yes. So to make these collaborations concrete, and there is a kind like a place where people can report. Yeah. So this is actually my concern. Maybe from this discussion we can come up with the idea of initiative. Do we need to have this kind of a concrete collaboration between state and non-state actors to prevent the cross-border terrorism? Because I think we aware that even though we already have bilateral cooperations between the government in the Asia region, but the Zulu incident in 2019 and then this 2020 is explaining to us that these people are still can do their acts even though we already have collaborations or agreements. So I think collaborations between the strong collaborations between civil society and the government is a must, and then we can maybe take initiative. We can make it happen. We can realize it after the discussions. That is my concern. Are you agree or not? Let's discuss it further. So, but actually, we actually already have a social WhatsApp group. We call it the WhatsApp group cross-border terrorism network. So actually Pak Pribadi and then our colleagues in the Philippines and also BNPT and also civil society, we already initiated that. But this is only limit to the social media and WhatsApp group only. That is the exchange information that we already done. Yeah. So maybe if you want to join, you are welcome. We can add more participants there, so to enrich and to also enrich our sharing experience and information. So this is what I want to share to you. So thank you very much. It's already 4 o'clock. So, and I saw the many participants are still here, stay until the end of the discussions. I really thank you for Afik, Joe, Ate Amina, Deka, dan juga Pak Pribadi for giving us the time to be a speaker and sharing also their experience and knowledge to us. This is really valuable discussions, and I hope this discussion will not end will not end. We can still build our communication and collaboration in the future. So thank you very much on behalf of Pakar and also SERV, the organization who initiate these discussions. We are really thank you, and also to the participants. We are really thank you, and then we will meet up again in the next discussions. We will share you the next topics of our discussion. Thank you very much, and terima kasih banyak. Semoga diskusi ini bermanfaat untuk teman-teman semua, dan mohon maaf jika ada kesalahan, ada banyak masalah teknikal di pihak saya, dan juga saya tidak bisa menerjemahkan dengan cepat karena fokus dengan technical problem. Jadi saya minta maaf untuk kekurangan ini, dan saya berharap semoga kita bisa tetap melanjutkan kerjasama kita di masa depan, dan juga kita bisa terlibat terus tidak hanya dalam diskusi tapi juga kerja-kerja nyata di lapangan.